Hello, Comic Book Junkies. It's the Frog Queen here, and today I've had the pleasure of interviewing Jeremy Holt. This is an interview about Jeremy's book Skip to the End, which is coming out as a collected hardcover edition on June 12th. This is a fully colored book by illustrator Alex Diodo, and the story was originally serialized in floppy format by Heavy Metal Magazine and has found its new home with Simon & Schuster's comic book imprint, Insight Comics. Skip to the End follows the bassist of a breakout 90s punk band, Johnny, who falls apart when his bandmate and best friend Kirk commits suicide. 20 years later, he struggles with heroin addiction, lost in the songs they created and desperate to relive the past when he discovers that he can, literally, live the past. With the aid of a mysterious guitar, Johnny begins to make trips back in time, searching for the roots of Kirk's unraveling. At Naranon meetings and in conversations with his sponsor Emily, he starts to cope with the events that led to Kirk's death. But by the time Johnny realizes that his visits can't change the present, he might be too addicted to stop. And without further ado, let's just jump into the interview, shall we?
All right. So, of course, Skip to the End is coming out in a collected edition for the first time, right?
That's correct.
Can you tell me a little bit about when it was first published?
It was first published in the fall of 2015. Yeah, I'm remembering this correctly. Yeah, 2015. October of 2015. It was a 4-issue miniseries through Heavy Metal. And then it wrapped up January. And then, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. So, what made you decide to actually put out a collected edition with its Insight Comics?
So, I was going to do the collected edition through Heavy Metal. But at the time, there was some internal restructuring, and a bunch of the books were put on hold, and some of the books that were slated to come out as trade paperbacks didn't come out, and mine was one of them. And because all of this was on pause, I wanted to see if someone else wanted to take it on. And initially, I pitched it to Insight because I had been working with them for a couple of years now on a different book, and it initially got rejected. And my editor was really bummed, and he was surprised because he felt it was pretty easy to market the concept, music as a form of time travel. And he somehow took it back through review. He took it through their group review again, and then he went through some kind of acquisitions meeting, and then he's like, yeah, we're set. We're going to do it. And it took about a year from that conversation to basically next month.
Wow. That seems like such a long process. That's interesting. And I have to say that I've not talked to too many people who had a book published somewhere specifically and then decided to kind of change publishers or what have you. Was it a difficult process to go through to make that jump, or?
Yeah, I mean, because when you land a book, you think, this is it. I'm in. I'm going to get this thing in print. It's going to look great. It's going to be on shelves. Editor's going to look at it. People are going to buy it. So to have to think about doing that all over again. But something that I really like about Insight is that they only print graphic novels. So they're kind of getting away from the traditional comic book market in the sense of single monthly issues. I like that as a creator. I like that because when the book comes out, it's collected. No one has to ask me when the next issue is coming out. The company has a long history of printing really nice collectible items, coffee table books, properties, any major motion picture event. They've printed some kind of nice collectible book. So I knew the books were going to look nice. So to see the actual books, and I now have 2 of them, they do a beautiful job.
Do you have any next to you?
Yeah, actually, I got a copy of Skip to the End and Skinned. Hold on one second. So they did last fall. They had printed for New York Comic Con exclusive variant cover for Skin, so nice spot gloss.
Super pretty.
which is different than what actually came out maybe a week.
Oh, okay.
And they're all hardbound, and they're actually the sizing is for the European market. I kind of forget why they went that way, but they look nice. And then
I always love those sizes.
let me skip to the end.
Yeah,
Spot quality.
really nice.
And yeah, so I mean they go all out, and it's just nice. It just looks professional. And I kind of am totally leaning towards the graphic novel format, and I have a new idea that I was actually developing last night, and thinking about it as a graphic novel. If I want to maybe pitch it to my editor, it would be nice not to be beholden to monthly issues.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of interesting how the market and I guess the comics market is changing now anyways. Do you know that I just went to my local comic book shop and bought 3 floppies, and it came to $19.50
What?
for 3 comics.
Wow.
And I think
Are they
all
oversized?
3 of them were from Image.
Oh, really? Were they oversized issues or something?
No. I'm Canadian, but I got the Beef. Oh no, Boom, Grass Kings.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And Death or Glory.
Oh,
'Cause I used to work for Magnetic Press, and I love Bengal. I mean, I like Rick Remender as well, but I'm a big Bengal fan, so.
so wait, each of those issues were like $4.99?
$4.99, $3.99. I don't know how much this Boom one is. $3.99. But
Yeah.
then the Canadian American exchange,
Oh.
and then sales tax. So I have never paid almost $20 for floppies in my entire life.
I mean, this is $24.99, and you get the entire thing.
You can't beat that.
And also, like, I actually was having this conversation on Twitter yesterday. A friend of mine, Ryan K. Lindsay, was asking about just...
Oh, I like Ryan a lot.
Yeah, he was talking about prospective sales for creator-owned comics, the single issue versus the graphic novel. Mm-hmm. And I had made the comment of, my experience with Insight, and that, I'm, not interested in doing single issues as much anymore, because if I table at a convention, which I've done for years, I have the first or maybe second issue of a story, and someone might walk by and they're like, "Hey, what's this?" And I'm like, I tell them, I give my pitch, and then they're like, "When's the rest coming out?" I'm like, "Oh, it'll be out, blah, blah, blah." They're like, "Cool," and they walk away.
Yes.
I'm not selling a complete story.
Yeah.
And Jim Zubkovich actually chimed into the conversation and was saying that, yeah, for creator-owned comics, like, there's a big push for the first issue, but everything drops off and then everyone trade waits. So he has seen the trend where creator-owned comics is leaning pretty heavily on graphic novels now.
True.
Which is interesting, and it's interesting timing for me to be at a publisher that only exclusively prints graphic novels.
Yeah, and a publisher that's, like, actually doing something, like, it's kind of still new to comics and graphic novels in general. Or, like, it's exciting because, like, you're kind of like, oh, well, where are they going to go? And, I mean, with, like, there's a lot of, like, the European market, for instance, like, what you're saying about the actual binding of the book, with people like Humanoids and stuff.
Sure.
They sell books like crazy, and all they do is big, beautiful graphic novels that you can put out and display on your coffee table. Like, they're gorgeous.
And it's nice, and the fact that Insight has a distribution deal with Simon Schuster opens these books up to, just traditional bookstores. And because the books, when they get solicited, are done, my editor and the publisher really push on the international markets. Like, they try to sell the international rights for these books before they even hit the shelves. So, like, the book I have coming out through them in October, I mean, my editor was in negotiations with foreign publishers back in last October, so like a year earlier. And I think it'd be cool if these books were able to be printed in different countries.
For sure. You can get translations and all kinds of things. So cool. what I was gonna say too is just like it does speak also a lot to the binge culture. Everybody wants everything now. You know, nobody wants to wait. And I mean, I liked waiting, especially for serialized comics, but it was also the fact that I think a lot of people now too, who are serializing comics, don't realize that you have to write differently to write serialized comics to keep things memorable 4 weeks apart, but also to keep them engaging and in a different way than you would. So it's kind of funny, like when I pick up something like a Marvel serialized book, because generally Marvel and DC, they've got serialized down to like, it's always going to be this way. This is how we do it, and this is how you keep your readers, because this is how it's always been. Anyway, but I pick up a trade and I'm like reading one of like a Marvel trade, even from like 10 years ago, especially. It's like, this is so bizarre when I like hold up like an Image trade and I'm comparing them, even the way that they're written, the way they flow, it's completely different. Mm-hmm. There's so much more leniency in kind of how you can write a serialized book for a creator-owned company or a creator-owned story. But as I say, like, it's not necessarily good to be serialized, because I've myself, even though I have much more patience than a standard probably audience, because I read so many comics, I do find I'll be like, well, this book should never have been serialized because it's lost me. You know, and it's lost its readers. It should have been self-contained. But I wonder, like, do people ever think that? Do they ever realize that maybe their books should never be serialized? You know,
I'm sure that they realize it, but not on a conscious level. I think that, you know, with a lot of creator-owned comics, a lot of them I feel get very cinematic because, like you said, they have to be memorable. Those cliffhangers really need to hook you hard, because you want to still be thinking about it. And 4 weeks is a long time. You could be reading a lot in 4 weeks. I mean, I average, at this point, I read 2 novels a weekend, like, burn through books. And specifically with Skip to the End, I actually pitched that as a whole chapter. So basically, I did the first issue, which was a huge commitment on the art team. And I said, I don't want to try to cram this into a 5 to 6 page pitch. I want to pace it the way I want to pace it. And I don't want to be, you know, beholden to what everyone expects. And so I just did the first chapter, 22 pages, and it was just, that's how I wanted to tell the story. And I feel fortunate that, you know, Heavy Metal first and then Insight, you know, saw that and didn't think, oh yeah, you know, you gotta make it flashy.
Well, let's talk about the story, because I have some specific questions about it, of course. Like you say, flashy. For me, like, the story is very much like a bit of a slice of life for the very first part. But it's very good at letting you get to know the characters, and of course, you know, it's right there in the plot that this is the band Samsara is modeled after Nirvana, right? Kirk is modeled after Kurt Cobain. But I wanted to kind of ask you, like, what it was when you were trying to, like, develop the story, and exactly why you had modeled it after Nirvana. If it was because of, like, your own personal feelings and love for the band, or something else completely different.
Great question. This story actually stems from a concept I've kind of believed in since I think the first time I heard a song or a band I really liked, and that stuck with me. And then I would hear that song years later, and it transported me back to that specific moment. And I've believed for a very long time that music is the closest that I will ever feel to traveling through time. So I've always wanted to write a story about that. I just didn't know how. So I am a little bit too young to have appreciated Nirvana and that whole grunge era when they were at their apex of fame. So, like, you know, 1990 to 94, or even 88 to 94, I was still in middle school. But I came to the band very late. and once I started listening to them, I was kind of obsessed. Like, I really got into the band, and I've watched and read and listened to just about anything they've ever produced. So then I got to thinking, like, man, what if someone could go back in time to save Kurt Cobain? Would they? And what would that be like? And then that made me think of that concept I've had in the back of my head, which is music as a form of time travel. And initially the story was going to deconstruct Kurt's life, and then I realized there's just too much about him. There's just this whole built-up mythology, the conspiracies surrounding his death. It's too complex, and it's not accessible for a reader. And basically, if I'd gone that route, I would basically say you need to love Nirvana to appreciate this story.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
I pulled it back, and I wanted to focus on someone else that was more accessible, and I shifted the names of the characters, the name of the band. I kept most of the history, the timeline anyway, intact for this story. So then I just kind of wanted to focus more on the idea of addiction. Many different forms it comes in, and I attended a few AA meetings for research, which was actually advised by my brother. He's a doctor, and he actually deals with opioid addiction. So he was like, you can go to these meetings. You need to go to the open discussion ones because they will allow respectful observers. So as someone who doesn't suffer from addiction, it was extremely informative. But yeah, from there, I didn't want to make this all about the lead singer, and really it's not. It's about someone who has lost his best friend, and he has a chance to maybe save him. And can he? When he himself needs saving as well.
Yeah, and I think that's what makes it such a much more compelling book than, like, as if you said, if it just followed Kurt Cobain around. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like we've done that in documentaries. You can do that in different movies and things. You can do that just by watching old YouTube videos of MTV. Like, there's not much value in that. Whereas telling a story that's actually very much from the fans' perspective, and then from, like, a family perspective, it has so much more soul to it. It actually makes you feel closer, even though you're not watching every living moment decision that Kurt Cobain is actually making.
Yeah, I like that you say that, because that's really, for me, that I was trying to just work out my own feelings about his death. Having, obviously come to this also late, but, I think about this person who existed for a very short amount of time. I think about him a lot, and I think about what would he have been doing if he had lasted 10 years longer, if he had lived through the 90s. And not that the early aughts are any better, but there was progress being made in certain social injustices that I think he really stood behind. And yeah, so this story I just kind of wanted as my own catharsis, be like, what would I do? How would I navigate this? So.
Yeah. Have you ever had to deal with anybody else anyone in your life personally that had an addiction? Or was this, like, completely 100% new? Like, as you said, you attended some meetings as an observer, but did you actually know anyone, or was this, like, 100% like a very different new world for you?
Yeah, 100% new. I talked about the topic in kind of great length with my brother, just getting informed. He works through the Yale School of Medicine, so he deals with, people that come into his hospital, and he gives them the advice, he gives them the medication they need to be on to kick the habit, and when they don't return, he tells me that he checks the obituaries, and sometimes he'll find them in there. It's like, that's why I didn't show up last week. So it's like learning that, and learning, from a systemic problem with the way this whole epidemic has started and has spawned in, like, my state, Vermont, is a huge drug issue, which I had no idea when I first moved here. But learning all of that history, a condensed history, and was really informative. But actually, the act of being around people like that, it was completely foreign. So I was super nervous going to that first meeting because I was like, this. In a lot of ways, it just feels wrong for me to be here because this is a sacred space. And it was my brother's like, no, it's totally fine. I'm telling you, you can do this. It's not wrong in any way. And in fact, some groups enjoy seeing people that aren't part of their world, and for them to see what it's like and explain that. So, yeah, so it was nerve-wracking, but it was a really great experience. Just learning to write about something I've never experienced.
I imagine you heard like some really amazing stories. Like for me personally, like I was amazed at how realistic you were able to talk about something that you didn't experience, like personally. And that's because like I had grown up and around like the music scene, and I was in bands and stuff in the big cities of Canada, not in the US, but the big cities of Canada. And and so I had actually realized like very early on when I was young and I was in these bands and stuff, how bad the drug scene really was. And this was a long time ago. This is like 15 years ago. So even like at that point, I was never into drugs, but everyone I knew was, and including one of my partners who was addicted to heroin, and he ended up going through methadone, and he ended up going through all this treatment, and he was clean for 6 years and then went right back to it.
Yeah.
And it was devastating. And of course we were all in bands together and playing together and stuff. And it was at that point when he went back to it that I was like, I'm leaving. And it's really hard to watch somebody go through that and know that you can't do anything, and that it's, but so when I was reading this book, I was like, oh my gosh, this like brings things back like so much, like from everything, from like the track marks, it was just like, I was like, oh my gosh. Does Jeremy actually know someone who's gone through this? Because it felt so realistic. So I just had to say that because I was quite impressed with how realistic it all was.
Thanks.
And I hope to God the music scene is not like that anymore, but I don't know.
I don't know. I don't. I think that you make an important distinction where, if someone goes down that path, you want to think that you can help them. You want to believe that you can have an influence, but when it comes to someone that goes that far down into this dark place, there's nothing you can do. They really need to do it for themselves, and it can be impossible. I guess the closest experience personally is an old roommate of mine was hooked on meth for a pretty long time. I mean, he was homeless at one point. He lived out of a car with his dog, and it took him, I think, 3 times to kick it. But when I met him, we worked at Apple together. When I met him, I would have never guessed, and he didn't bring it up until years later when we were living together. And it wasn't actually until I mentioned Breaking Bad, and I was like, "Oh man, you got to watch this show." And
God!
I heard it's pretty good. And I was like, yeah, we should watch it. So watch the first episode, and he's like, I can't watch this. And I was like, and then he kind of explained things. I was like, oh, shit. Oh. So sorry. He's like, no, I mean, it's a testament to what they're producing. Like, it cuts deep. It's real. I was like, okay. Yeah, so for this story, the idea that, I think people project onto the friend they're trying to save, and they want to believe that they can, and at the end of the day, it's not up to them. It's enough people to rally behind someone saying, hey, you need to stop doing this, and that's really the hardest thing. So just accept it and be like, you're walking your own path, and I can't go with you.
And I hope I'm not like spoiling anything by saying this, but I do like the book, the fact that the book doesn't try to explain Kurt's suicide in any way. It's like, oh, we're not going to say like this is why it happened 100%, or it just doesn't. It's like that's not the point.
Yeah,
and
it's definitely not the point, and it's definitely not about his Cobain's actual suicide and conspiracies around it, because the death happens, and it's about how do you move forward. And for this, my idea in my head was that for this guy, he has to go back in order to move forward. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of avoid some serious milestones in the history of the band, because I knew it would have just been a distraction.
The band, the actual band aside, Nirvana aside, what made you choose the name Samsara?
So Nirvana is the place that you go to for this rebirth, and Samsara is the full cycle of rebirth, which I thought was kind of perfect. And I think a friend of mine. So I've written a novel adaptation of this, and a friend of mine read it, and she was like, "So are you basing this off the actual band Samsara?" I was like, "What band?" And she's like, "Oh, they're like this hardcore metal band." I was like, "No, but I'm gonna look into that band. That's great." But yeah, I wanted to kind of change the name, but make it close enough that even down to the font for the title, Onyx font, which is iconic for the band, for people to be like, "Is this?" Oh, and you don't have to be a Nirvana fan to enjoy this story, which is another focus.
Right.
You just want to see a character go through some shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I had another question. Let me just double check here. I was like, I know we covered a lot of the stuff that I was going to talk about anyway, so I won't repeat myself.
No worries.
Let me just see. Oh yes, I wanted to talk about the nature just of regret in the book, because of course the main character is addled with regret, as is the journalist. And she's kind of I find her character problematic, which I mean is the point, I'm sure. But she kind of she started bothering me very quickly, which is usually a good sign of a well-written character, is when you're bothered by them. But I was just perturbed because I was I didn't trust her. She was too interested from the get-go.
Yeah.
And she was very preachy. And it reminded me of a lot of people from NA meetings. So I was just oh God, I hated those people, But she, on herself, in and of herself, is full of regret, just as much as Johnny is. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little about how you explored that and kind of developed.
I mean, I know we all have regret. That's a given. I don't have anything in my life that compares to the level of losing someone so close to you so unexpectedly. There are maybe 2 or 3 people in my life that I knew at one point. 2 people I knew growing up in elementary and middle school that I found out years later that they had died, which I was far removed from those instances. And a girl that I dated for a week in high school died in a car accident a couple weeks after that. And those were the only instances. But, when I think of the relationship of people like Chris Novoselic and Dave Grohl, who were so close to someone like Kurt, who was kind of a walking contradiction in a lot of ways in the way he led his life, and to just suddenly, but to have all of this go away, to have someone go away in such a public forum, I can't imagine. So it took a lot of reading about the band from multiple perspectives. It was trying to understand that whole movement of music at the end of the 80s, getting out of the hair metal bands of the 80s, bands producing music in a part of the country that was not a music scene. Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, was not a scene. Some of the proto grunge bands, like Green River, those guys were producing music like in the early 80s in Seattle and around Seattle. This was before Microsoft had even shown up. So it was like a place that people just didn't go. So a lot of bands would leave, and by the end of the 80s, there were bands that were like, no, we're going to just stick it out here, make our music the way we want to make it, promote it, we want to promote it, and if you like it, you like it. If you don't, who cares? So kind of trying to understand what it was like for any of the people that were in these bands that lost people was a lot of work, because I don't know what that's like. And once I kind of grasped it and could kind of understand it, that's what I wanted to try to figure out, is how does someone, and I'm taking a very fictionalized version of the basis of this fictional version of Nirvana, because Chris Novoselic is leading a perfectly great life. But I wanted to take the idea that if this best friend didn't move on, if this best friend is just wallowing in the past, cannot move forward, is obsessed with this very short amount of time that they were like royalty, and how does one unpack that? How does one find closure? So, in this story, it's interesting writing a novel on this, because I was able to explore the characters in a much deeper way. When I read the graphic novel now, I feel like it speeds through a lot of the stuff that I wanted to explore. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, we all would like to do things differently. I mean, speaking of regret, when I look at the comic, I regret some aspects. Like, oh my god, I regret this differently. But yeah, it was just trying to get into the headspace of someone who's gone through something super tragic.
We were talking about speaking of like, oh, I wish I could do this or change this or go back in time and fix this. Do you feel like that about like all of your comics? Do you think you'll always feel like that about your work in general, or? I know you did a podcast or an interview earlier or something about imposter syndrome, and which comes up a lot in the comic book industry. Actually, people talk about this a lot.
I mean, I think in general, people that want to get to a place of success oftentimes feel like they're not good enough, or they're just faking it until they make it. I mean, I know I'm always going to regret when I look back on work I've done. I mean, the fact that I can compose an email, I will reread it 10,000 times, and then send and read it one more time after sending it and be like, typo, I hate myself.
Yeah.
I can't let that stuff go. And so to see something in print, like, that's like writing something in stone. So I'm always going to wish I'd done something better. But, the more you write, I feel like the less that's going to happen, hopefully, because I'll catch myself before I let myself do that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, everybody makes mistakes anyway. But, yeah, I think one of my personal struggles is that I write all the time, but then I'm constantly revising it, and I'm like, at what point do I stop revising this? Then I'll let it sit and simmer and do nothing with it, and even like 2 months later, I'll be like, oh, I'll just go back and change that. And I mean, maybe it never ends. Maybe it just never ends. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it. I think it's a personality trait. Like, we are perfectionists, I think. And as far as feeling like an imposter, I think that you just have to trust the process, whatever that might be, whatever you're trying to pursue, whatever you're trying to accomplish. You have to first build a process for yourself, a routine. This works for me. Build a routine, and then trust in that routine, because you've built it from the ground up. It's like building a house. And it's like, well, yeah, I would like a bigger house, but this house is still standing, and I can get out of the rain, and it's fine, and I need to just focus on the here and now. So, when I see friends moving on to bigger things, when I see that, maybe my books aren't reaching an audience or selling as well as I had hoped, I just have to turn focus to the process and just get back to work. Because dwelling on anything else is just kind of sitting in a rocking chair.
Yeah. Yeah. Dwelling's not good. Let's not dwell and simmer. Well, thank you for coming on my show today.
Yeah.
The book comes out in hard copy on June 12th.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
And everyone can follow you on all the regular social medias. So it's Instagram, it's Clump of Trees, and Twitter is Jeremy_Holt.
Correct.
Okay. Am I forgetting any other ones?
No, I got off of Facebook. Oh, sorry, somebody just texted me.
Oh, that's okay.
I got off Facebook in January, so I'm not on there. I have
That's right, yeah.
site that I update not enough, which is just clumpoftrees.tumblr.com.
Tumblr. Okay, yes, Tumblr. Tumblr is also the one that I kind of fall into like a dark pit of despair. Whenever I go on Tumblr.
I never really scroll through Tumblr. That's the thing. I post and that's it. Like I'm so
okay
about it that I'll just post through Instagram. Like
oh, that makes sense. Yes.
Because I don't ever really look at Tumblr. I've never been a Tumblr. I don't. What's the term for people that I don't know?
I don't know either. I have no idea.
But like
I don't really like it. It kind of it bothers me.
Yeah, I need a real site. That's something I'm working on. That's one of my goals for 2018 is to have a real website.
We'll help you with that. I'm coding my own right now.
Oh wow,
so,
that's like I just went through GoDaddy, got a URL, and yeah.
Yeah, just get a template and then fix the coding, and it's kind of painful, but it's not too bad.
I moved the domain over to Squarespace, which I haven't really tinkered with, but my brother's just put up his site for his business. He owns a CrossFit gym, and he was swearing by it, and I was like, okay. And
yeah, a lot of people like Squarespace, actually. Yeah, and a lot of comic book people use it. A lot of comic book people use it, so that works. Cool. Well, I will let you go. It's Friday. I'm going to bed. I'm tired. It's pretty pathetic, but it's free comic book day tomorrow.
Yes.
Are you going out to get comics and stuff?
There's no comic shop in my town, so no.
What?
There's a bookshop that Robert Frost used to frequent.
There's no comic shop?
I have to go an hour if I want to hit a comic shop.
Oh, that's just weird to me.
I'm
from a very, very small town, and there's a comic book store.
Wait, how many people are we talking? What's small?
What's small from where I am?
Yeah.
Oh God, how many people? I have to Google this now because you'll be like, oh yeah, that's small, but like I can't even think of how many.
I moved from Brooklyn to Middlebury, Vermont.
Why did you leave Brooklyn?
my wife took a job here. She's a professor and museum curator at a college there.
Okay, I'm looking it up. Population is where I was born. Where's the population?
It's so small, there's nobody there.
Oh, 2,037 people.
Okay, that's small. Okay, so where I live, I call it a village. We're 8,000 people, and that's including the students. So, tiny. But yeah, there's no comic book shop. There was a comic book shop maybe 20 years ago, and then it became a computer repair shop, and now it's just vacant.
Oh, well, that's just sad.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, you could have, like, a comic book shop. You should do this. Open a comic book shop with the used bookstore on the side and then a laundromat in back. That's, like, your small-town comic book shop.
I like it. And maybe you can try to get a liquor license and sell beer. So you
could do that in the States, couldn't you?
Oh, totally.
You can't do that here.
I saw a business that did that. It was a laundromat, and it was a bar as well, and it was called, like, Sippin' Suds, and I was like, yeah.
Sippin' Suds.
It's like that.
Do that. Sippin' Suds and what? No, it's got a rhyme. Something about serialized.
Oh yeah.
I don't know. We'll figure it out. Anyway. All right. Well, I'll let you go.
Okay.
And thank you for coming on the show.